True cost. The actual price tag of something people engage in, measured in anything from dollars to time to physical or mental health to other people or nations to the impact on the environment. Related to hidden cost, true cost concerns the total impact of decisions and actions you and I engage in on a constant basis. And so for everything we do, you and I, there is a visible surface cost and a less visible true cost, which we choose or not to factor into the decisions that we make and the things that we pursue. As most of you know, I'm an avid runner. I've been running since I was a teenager, and I can't imagine my life without it. It gives me cardiovascular health, keeps me fit, frankly, keeps me sane. But it is not free. Running comes with costs to your legs and your feet and your knees and your toes and your time. Some of these costs are quite obvious and require ibuprofen. Others not so much. While running is probably lengthening my life by strengthening my heart, it may also be shortening my life by polluting my lungs. Since the air quality in downtown Indianapolis, where I run most of the time, is bad enough for the American Lung Association to give our fair city a consistent F grade for air quality, true cost is difficult to measure, partly because there is often little incentive to do so. I will keep running on wooded trails as often as possible, but as for my lungs, I'm going to just keep taking my chances. However, in the wider world of endeavor, this cost to benefit, true cost conversation is a lot more subtle, more complicated. Indeed, I first came to the concept of true cost through my work with climate change, especially related to coal plants in Indiana, which almost everyone now acknowledges to be the dirtiest form of electrical power generation there is, with its byproducts of lead and arsenic and mercury and, of course, atmospheric CO2, and its unencapsulated ash lagoons, which can easily seep into groundwater. This has long been known in the environmental community, that a true assessment of fossil fuel dependence was much costlier than appeared on industry spreadsheets, back when coal burning was still cheaper to operate, which, of course, now it isn't compared to renewable sources. But, of course, the true cost question applies everywhere, as it always has. Which brings me to our two scripture readings this morning, each a biblical study of true cost, as it turns out, and surprisingly germane, I believe, to this moment in America. Here's a personal claim of mine, but not only mine, still one that has been borne out in my experience over decades. That the Bible is deeply relevant to any given moment of time, this time, our time, no exception. In recent days, I've been noting biblical parallels to this historical moment that give me both greater clarity and deeper concern. So, two passages, each one taking place at a pivotal moment in biblical history, one concerning God's people Israel, the other God's man Jesus. The first, and just note here, looking at everything, I may get to the second one in this sermon, or I may have to get to the second example a little later on than this sermon. But the first, from the book known as 1 Samuel, describes the very moment when Israel ceased to be a collection of tribes and became a monarchy. You heard Susan read it. Thus altering the fate of the Hebrew people forever. When the Hebrews escaped bondage in Egypt and entered the promised land, they formed a tribal confederacy with priests to keep the faith and judges to keep the peace. And this seemed to hum along fairly well until came a time of insecurity, and some of the people began to clamor for something else. They looked around at the surrounding nations, monarchical nations, and they came to believe that they too needed a king. Now, Samuel, the prophet, priest, judge, aging, and with no worthy successor, fought them tooth and nail over that notion. But in the end, God's voice spoke. It pierced through the debate. You want a king? God said, and okay, I'm paraphrasing. You can have a king, and these will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. Your king will conscript your sons and throw them in the battle. He will put them to work in his fields and reap his harvest. He will take your daughters to be his helpers. He will take your best fields and vineyards and olive groves and your livestock as his own and give them away to his wealthy friends, and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, but I, the Lord, will not answer you in that day. I tell you this story again because the parallels to today cry out to me like banshees on a dark road to Dublin. I had to throw that in. I'm thinking about everything Irish these days. For one thing, we Americans and the Israelites each came into being, obvious differences acknowledged, from a similar impulse, an impulse of freedom. They escaped an Egyptian pharaoh, we an English king. They had formed a tribal confederacy, we a federation of United States. They a system of governance through priests and judges, we through a trifecta of separate but equal branches promoting the rule of law. I tell you this story because just as the Israelites had lost their memory of what tyranny and bondage meant, so we Americans have lost ours. The fact is that none of us, or very few of us, have any idea what living under an autocratic regime is actually like, what the true cost of giving up our basic freedoms is actually like. There are many in the world who could tell us, and it wouldn't sound pretty, just as the writer of 1 Samuel tried to tell the Hebrews in the voice of God. They did not listen. Many of us will not listen either. Even when told, as we read, the Israelites continued to clamor for a king. Some of us will continue to minimize the danger of the precipice on which we are teetering. But others will begin to see. Others will remember their roots and trace them to a place of understanding. Some Baptists will be among their number. Yes, Baptists, you and I, whether you're a reluctant Baptist or not, you and I, who have special cause to listen to the history of Israel and to judge it alongside our own. We Baptists, as I have been reminding you and reminding myself over recent weeks, trace our origins to just such an escape from tyranny. The tyranny of an English king in their quest for religious liberty here in America. No, not perfect, not at first for everyone, but at least a principled conviction about liberty viewed as inalienable as ours, we Baptists. And since we're stuck with this troubling moniker Baptist, at this awkward point of time, we might as well lean into the heart of it and what it means, which is freedom, and nothing less than freedom. We Baptists might as well recognize the true cost of what is going on. We, more than most. Over recent weeks, I have been attempting to give voice from this pulpit to what most of us are feeling and are thinking. Last week, I took a break from that. But truth is, the newsreel of concern will not take a break from us. Will it? Will not take a break from the fact that this democratic way is under assault. Are we able, as God's people, to have the true cost conversation about this? The true cost to global peace of the wholesale and indiscriminate firing of career diplomats and civil servants who understand the world because they have spent decades cultivating that understanding. and relationships within it. The true cost to global peace and well-being of the wholesale and indiscriminate cutting of organizations like USAID, scattered in service around the world, combating disease and the effects of climate change, lifting up lives, doing microfinance, cultivating goodwill for all of us back here at home. The true cost of funding our government, including well-trained and dedicated IRS agents who track down tax fraud, so that everyone pays their fair share like you and I do. The true cost of defunding that. The true cost to fire safety of a greatly reduced Forest Service. The true cost to disaster relief of a skeleton FEMA or a hollowed-out CDC. In the wake of a pandemic with things like bird flu and a resurgence of measles. The true cost of running down the Social Security Administration, which most retired Americans rely upon to make ends meet. Many of you right here, and who paid into that system your entire lives. The true cost of shuttering Medicaid, which ensures 24% of all Americans, 92% of the adults on which are working full or part-time jobs already. The true cost of Lord knows what else and what next. The true cost of the gutting of all these agencies is incalculably large. In a mass program of unraveling, while plans for $4.5 trillion in tax cuts slanted toward the wealthiest among us and ballooning the deficit to even higher levels sails ahead. There is a true cost to the things that are being done as we speak to dismantle the American system of government. That cost is right now a hidden cost to be measured in months, likely years, but a good bit of that cost is now already baked into our futures. Some of it can be anticipated now, just as Samuel's words previewed the road the Hebrews were about to go down in their great quest for a king. There are those who would see a benefit from empowering would-be strongmen to establish an autocratic state to make decisions for us. And where on the balance sheet do people weigh the cost of such tyranny, of the raw exercise of power over the masses? What does that balance sheet of true cost look like? I suppose we can only call it tyranny, though, if it's against our wills. If we're okay with it, if we don't do anything about it, then that's on us. Well, for right now, some will think it's somebody else's liberty at stake, somebody else's job, somebody else's benefit, somebody else's deportation. But as it moves along, more and more of us are getting to recognize those someones pretty well. And perhaps we should recall the famous quote of Martin Niemöller, which goes, "First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists. I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak." Which brings me to my last point. The true cost of everything involves us. There is no free ride. Each decision of ours, however insignificant and go along it may appear, is critical in the larger scheme of the moral universe. The moral universe that I believe in and you believe in. There is, in other words, a necessary cost for us, whoever we are. There is a cost for sticking up for people in pain, and that cost is pain. There is a cost for embracing people who are targeted. That cost is a target. There is a cost for championing the true gospel message of sacrifice for the neighbor's sake. That cost is sacrifice. There is, in short, a true cost to stand up for the love of God, for each of all, without remainder, and that cost is and has always been our lives. I know we all see this moment differently. We are each free to see this moment differently. But as your pastor, I believe that if ever there has been a moment in which our faith is calling us to count the true cost of our commitment to the way of Jesus, a way of grace and truth and courage and freedom, then that day is now. And amen.